I am very pleased to introduce A Woman's Nation, The Change That Is Coming, with Terry McCullough, Director of No Ceilings, the Full Participation Project, Stephanie Shryock, President of Emily's List, Lex Schroeder, writer, editor, and instructor, Take the Lead Women, and Olivia Morgan, editor of The Shriver Report and senior advisor of A Woman's Nation. Please join me in welcoming them.
So welcome. My name is Lex Schroeder, and I'm especially honored to be with you all. I work with Take the Lead, an organization that is committed to leadership parity across the board by 2025. So speaking with these three women who need no introduction, and you can read more about them. We're going to jump right into the questions. But speaking with you all is just sort of perfect for that goal of getting women to leadership parity, and I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are and how we get there, what the real challenges and opportunities are. So you all are working on incredible projects, but I'm really curious, what are you most excited about, or what might people get involved with? Terry, I'd love to start with you at the No Ceilings Project.
Lex, thanks so much. I'm so thrilled to be here, and thanks to Claudia for bringing us all together. I am thrilled to be a part of No Ceilings, the Full Participation Project at the Clinton Foundation, led by Secretary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. And our goal is to advance the full participation of women and girls throughout the world. And it has its groundings in Secretary Clinton's involvement in the Beijing World Conference on Women almost 20 years ago. So looking toward that 20-year anniversary in 2015, we are in the process of working with the Gates Foundation to gather data of all kinds, actually, from some very good and traditional sources like the IMF, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and perhaps some non-traditional sources like Twitter and Facebook and big data to take a look at the status of women and girls, assess and celebrate the progress that we have made over the last 20 years, and then really take a look at the gaps where we haven't made a lot of progress, and also really the gaps in data where we just don't know a lot about women and girls in certain years and certain geographies for a variety of reasons. This is about making an evidence-based case, because we don't believe that the full participation of women and girls is a parenthetical exercise. We believe that that is integral to economic vitality, to stability and security throughout the world. So we will gather this data with the Gates Foundation and present a progress report the beginning of 2015 to share this information. And from that data, we are going to create a call to action, a policy agenda that really identifies what we can do to close those gaps in hopefully fewer than 20 years. We are really invested in finding out what the data tells us, but we also want to hear people's stories and their experiences with challenges to full participation. So we are having conversations. We kicked that off at the Lower East Side Girls Club a month or so ago in a conversation around girls, and we'll have a series of those. And we know we can't meet with everyone, so we also have a survey on the Clinton Foundation website. It should be clintonfoundation.org/survey, where you can go and share with us your challenges and your thoughts around full participation.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to move over to Stephanie from Emily's List. You and your organization have made incredible achievements over the last couple of years, electing more women to office than ever. But what are you particularly interested in and excited about right now that your organization is doing?
Well, I think I need to remind everybody that there's an election this November. So everybody who is here and everybody who is watching, if there's one thing you can do is remember there's an election this November that we're obviously very focused on. I'm thrilled to be here, by the way, and thank you all for taking time out of, I know, very busy schedules to have these important conversations. And those that are watching all over the country, thousands and thousands of people, this is really important because the power of women's voices is incredible. And at Emily's List, we're committed every single day to elect pro-choice Democratic women. But we know that when we have more women at our decision-making tables in this country, in government, on corporate boards, in law firms, it does not matter where, that we will then get the policies that are best for our families. And that is what we are committed to do every day. So as I look at really the next or the next few months, and a potential big race in 2016, we're very focused on engaging women in this process. So often we talk about women voters, and a lot of our sisters just don't get out and vote in midterm elections. And much of that is to do with lives that are incredibly complicated and busy, with lack of economic opportunity to advance forward. And we have to really engage the women all across this country because they decide these elections. We will decide who controls the United States Senate in November. We will decide who controls the House, who our governors are, who our city council members are. And we will most likely decide just by whether or not we show up or not. So at Emily's List, a lot of what we're doing is talking to women all across the country and getting them engaged, as we all need to be engaged in electoral politics, because those who are serving really do determine the policies that we are living with every single day. And we'd sure like to add to our historic number of women serving in the House and the Senate this election after the 2012 election. And if I may, we got to elect some Democratic women governors. Now you've got a very good Democrat up for re-election here, so I'll not talk about Governor Cuomo, other than it would be nice to see him re-elected. But this country only has one Democratic woman governor in the entire country, and that's Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire, and she is fantastic and up for re-election. But we have an opportunity to elect women in Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. I mean, and dare I not forget, Texas. And this is really important for the women of those states and for role models across the country. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you. Now, Olivia, you're managing editor of the Shriver Report, which is fantastic. And I didn't realize the Shriver Report, its first report was published in 2009. And since then, it's made a huge impact, had wonderful influence in the world. What are you up to these days? And what do you want to share that people might be able to get involved with?
Great. Thank you for asking. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Claudia. Actually, the Shriver Reports were born out of a women's conference in California. Maria Shriver was First Lady of California and was convening, actually, the previous administration had done it too, convening women every year in Long Beach. And as she was building these conferences and, like, I call it Oprah-sizing them, literally she brought Oprah, but also it was like, it became a more emotive experience, and a lot of information of all kinds was shared. She tapped into this phenomenon where, 35,000 women were coming over the course of 3 days, and tickets were selling out online. Like, when does that happen with a government conference? So realizing that there was a conversation that people wanted to have and that she was positioned to take it further. We had the first Shriver Report in 2009 that looked at this transformational change we've all been experiencing. Over the past 50 years, women have moved into the workforce, and in fact, in 2009, we were first 50% of the workforce. It's now back to like 48%, but we tipped the scales for a little bit there. And family structures have changed as a result of many things, but women's earning power is one of those things. And we wanted to look at what the ripple effect of that change has been across the country. So the work that Terry and Secretary Clinton have done internationally at understanding that if you invest, and really this is common practice now, if you invest in women, in communities, it helps the whole community, it grows the whole community and its economy. We thought, could we be doing more of that at home, and what does the picture look like at home? So the first Shriver Report discovered how families were adapting, people were adapting. What we found was they're way ahead of institutions, not surprisingly. Women are 2/3 of, are primary or co-breadwinners in 2/3 of American families. The whole, June Cleaver story was never reality, but it really isn't now. It's like 20% of families have a stay-at-home mom. So one of the changes that allows is men are more favorable towards policies that support women in the workplace because, it's literally their bread and butter as they're depending on these women. So the first report looked at those ripple effects. The second report we did looked at one aspect of the many hats that women wear through the lens of Alzheimer's. We looked at elder care as baby boomers were turning 65. The first wave of baby boomers were turning 65 that year. And so we looked at these, so many women are sandwich generation, they're caring for parents, they're raising children, and they're also working. They're also supporting their families. And not surprisingly, our research there found that their stress levels are absolutely through the roof. The most recent report we did this spring, we timed to the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty. President Johnson kicked it off in his State of the Union address, and actually Maria's dad, Sergeant Shriver, led that effort. So we wanted to see, well, where are we 50 years later, and now that women are more engaged in all aspects of society, how can we fight poverty through women, really? Let's look at it through the lens of women. What we found is that while chronic poverty absolutely exists and is relatively a smaller portion, there is this enormous swath of the country that is living in chronic economic insecurity, kind of dipping in and out of poverty, above and below the poverty line. And in fact, one of every 2 Americans will live in poverty at some point in their life, which is just crazy if you think about it. Not surprisingly, most of those people are women and the children who depend on them. One of the most exciting parts of this report, we did a companion documentary with HBO that followed a 24-hour daycare center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with these all working women dropping off their kids. They have low-income jobs that don't have dependable schedules, don't have flexible schedules. They depend on a 24-hour daycare center. We followed one woman, Katrina Gilbert, and actually the documentary is titled Paycheck to Paycheck, The Life and Times of Katrina Gilbert, and you should watch it. That's one thing you could do. But it really illustrated how the world is resting on these women's shoulders. And there are these moments throughout, there's a year of her life, and there are these moments where you see her community, her children, her boyfriend, they're all saying, her ex-husband, she's like, I want him to spend time with the kids, but it's $20 in gas money if I pay for him to come. Everyone is depending on this woman. I think it's a microcosm of where we are in the country.
And I hope we have time to get back to how the women's movement and kind of the increasing wealth gap, how those two things are related and the potential for kind of working with each other. But I want to talk about kind of the role of men in the women's movement across all sectors when we think about getting women to leadership parity. We talked about it a bit with the He for She panel yesterday, and I just want to shout out to John Gersma and Nigel Barker and all other great men who've been involved in this conference. I think they deserve a round of applause. It's just huge, and I hope there's many more men here next year. But I'm really curious, sort of from your experience running your organizations and being a part of building this movement, what do you think the opportunity for men is, and what do you think their role might be? Or how have you seen men play a part that maybe surprised you? And I'd start with Terry.
I love this title, Women's Nation, but I sort of wish it was instead a nation for all of us, because that's the conversation that we have to have here. What an extraordinary opportunity it is for us to gather together and talk about these issues, but we can't only be talking to each other. We have to talk to as diverse a group of interested and not interested people, and that is really very much the genesis of this project. In Secretary Clinton's experience as Secretary of State, she would go and meet with various world leaders about very critical issues and then start talking about the women in the region, and she would find that the leaders' eyes would glaze over. And it occurred to her that we are making a case and have made a case for the empowerment and full participation of women as a moral issue for a really long time. But it is very clear that we have to make a case to certain people who are not as convinced that it is the right thing to do and a smart return on investment from their perspective. So in that respect, we think a lot about men engaging with us here, because the idea is investing in women benefits us all.
I love that, how to engage people who are interested and not interested. One of the things I think a lot about is if people aren't interested, that's information, right? That's just as much information as the people who are interested and are in the room, and how do we work with that? Stephanie, what about you? What do you think the role of men is or could be? Or?
Well, I'm going to be incredibly practical, which is like, this is a partnership, and we talk about, maybe we'll talk about the women's movement, but really it's a families movement, and needing policies that are helping women and men live the lives they want to live. And why we feel so strongly that a true representative democracy, when you have an equal number of women and men, or at least maybe 51% women, but an equal number of women and men sitting at those tables, that's when we're going to get those policies, because all of the perspectives, like, one woman cannot represent 51% of the population, nor can one man. Like, we really do need to have diversity of voices. But what I have seen, and it's beginning, which is really men looking and saying, this really matters. One of the fastest groups of growing membership of Emily's List, an organization that's been around 29 years, but we added 1 million new members to Emily's List in the last year and a half, and a big chunk of those are men who really feel strongly that they want to see a government that represents this nation. And we call upon men, just as I call upon everybody in this room, that when there are openings, opportunities to move somebody into a promotion or recruit somebody to run for office or to look at that next step, that look at the women around you. You can, men and women together can help women step up. Because also when we were recruiting candidates, one of the things that's said about women candidates, and it is more often true than not, is that we need to be asked. Now, part of it is we just don't think about it because we're busy. We're just really busy. You're like, you want me to run for, I got a job, I've got to get the kids to soccer practice, who's going to take care of the laundry, I got to cook dinner, and now you're asking me to run for office on top of that? Can talk to Stacey Apple. She's running in Iowa. She's got 6 kids, running for Congress today. Thank goodness she can win that seat. But like, she's got to balance it all. But it takes, as Secretary Clinton once said, it does take a village, and we need our male counterparts to be part of that. And the good news, more and more of them are. And that's what's going to make the difference here. That's what's going to change all of this.
If I can just raise one point that I think is really important, that when we think about mentoring young women through a pipeline, be it elected office or be it whatever realm, in a corporate realm, we often just first think, where's my woman mentor? There are so many fantastic men out there eager to mentor women into these roles, and I think that we all just need to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I remember I was at a talk last year, and Tony Schwartz from the Energy Project stood up and said, the dominant group doesn't know that they're dominant. So the invitation does matter. And then as a male advocate for women, then you have to extend the invitation, So anyway, I think men's role is really important, so it's really helpful hearing both of your views on that. So back to, Terry, your observation that there's this question of sort of, we should support women because it's a good business decision. It's just a great return on investment. Or we should support women and go to bat for them because it's the right thing to do. Women's rights are human rights. Does it matter? I'd love to hear from you, Olivia, and others who want to chime in. Does it matter? Is there a strategy or approach to change that is more effective, do you think? Moral obligation or business decision?
I think, well, when you're talking about moral obligation, often you're preaching to the choir. I think you can't let go of making that case, and I don't think it's an either or. In terms of the practicality, there's so much data there about including women and having women in leadership roles and the good it does for any organization. I think Warren Buffett, said, it was remarking on how incredibly successful our country has been since its founding. And that's essentially with one hand tied behind its back. If we could, no organization and no manager is a good manager if they're not developing the resources of 100% of their workforce population, team, et cetera. So certainly, I think you can make the practical argument. And I think that actually comes back to the last question about men. There are men who are talking really pretty bluntly and bravely about violence towards women and misogyny and how harmful it is to men. Yeah. And they can make the case in a way that men can hear that maybe sounds a little different coming from women.
Not only are we seeing report after report about corporations with more women on their boards have higher profits, and you're seeing return on investment, just on the political front, we just had a historic election in 2012, and there's 20 women in the United States Senate for the first time in our history. Of course, I do realize that means there's 80 men, so yes, I know we have a lot of work to do. But what is the impact of having 20 women in the United States Senate? And I actually get this question quite a bit, sort of does it matter, the impact piece of it? And what we have all witnessed in the last year and a half is the immense impact these women are having. There's 7 women who are chairs of committees, including budget and appropriations, and what Senator Mikulski has brought in thinking about families into that appropriations process is very important for this country. You even have folks like Senator John McCain, who I agree not at all, ever, on anything, except on this point, which is during the government shutdown, when nobody would come to the table to find a solution, it was those women from both sides of the aisle who found a solution, said this, enough is enough, let's roll up our sleeves, let's find a solution. And that's precisely what ended the government shutdown. It's what ensured that the Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized, when those women, arm in arm, again, 16 Democrats, 4 Republicans, stood together and said, we are doing this. Yeah. So the impact is real, and it's changing our lives already. And just imagine what it could be when we finally get to that 50, 51, 52. Few extra after all these years.
We've talked a lot about men and women working together, equal balance, but I'm really curious, Olivia, you've spoken a little bit about the women's movement across generations, or across generations within families, and how it affects mothers and daughters, and the cycles repeat. I'm curious to hear from all of you, or whoever would like to jump in, sort of what is the opportunity for working across generations? I feel like it's a pretty good spread here across the generations at the S.H.E Summit, and I've been to some events that have a good spread, some not so much. But what is the opportunity across the generations? How have you seen women organizing? And I know that the women's movement kind of happens in cycles. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Do you want me to jump in? To that, I would say, well, do you mind if I go to, okay. Most recent S.H.E report, I'm sorry, my brain's going like this. Most recent S.H.E report, we worked with Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and they work with low-income communities, and their work is based on the idea that a 2-generational approach is the most effective way to lift people out of poverty. That what's good for the child is good for the mother or parent, but it is most often a mother, and vice versa. There's an element of mutual motivation. There's if the mother is going to school, that's going to encourage her children to stay in school, et cetera. So we worked with them on focus groups with teen girls, boys, and women in cities across the country to find out what it is that teen girls need to know from previous generations and may or may not be hearing. We just wanted to find out. It was kind of, the idea was a life ed. Like 50 years ago, you had home ec. What would that look like now? What's the education that girls need to have now? And it was really interesting to hear, mothers are so invested in their kids, and they have the experience, they know the mistakes that they've made. First and foremost, they're stay in school, college before kids. But what we learned from the teens is they're not listening to their parents, but they do, when they recognize a need for mentors. They talked a lot about coaches, actually. Surprisingly, the boys and the girls, when we asked where do you go to for guidance, it came again and again to teachers and coaches, and sometimes friends, a lot of friends. So the skills that they need, the knowledge that they need, I think their mentorship is really critical, and there's a gap there. That's also something that we can all be doing.
Okay, great, interesting. Any other thoughts about working across the generations?
You know, I think it's just such an interesting moment because we have a generation of millennials, I guess we would call them. So many young people at this point, so deeply invested at the core in making some change and creating a world they want to live in. You know, when I was getting out of college, my father said to me, go find a job where you can work in the government for 30 years and that's success in your life. that would just be abhorrent to a lot of you, I would imagine, because the idea of so many I've talked to is coming into this world and creating either your own work or creating the workplace that you want to live in. Yet we have, or work in rather, you shouldn't be living in your workplace. We have an environment where, you know, barely 20% women represented in the Congress, 4% of the Fortune 1000 CEOs are women. So as you look and you think, I can achieve anything, yet here are these challenges to you. We need to work together to really open up that opportunity in a much broader way.
That's very true.
Okay, great.
You know, and we are seeing, you know, more and more young women, define it as you would like, younger women stepping up, running for office. And this year, interestingly and wonderfully, we have a number of women with young children who are children that are in school, that are stepping up to run for office. I mentioned Stacey Apple, Michelle Nunn running for United States Senate in Georgia. There's a number of them. In fact, we don't recall anything close to this before. You know, and for a long time, there was sort of a sense that the kids had to be out of school on their way, and maybe I had a little time freed up so I could run for office, and that was sort of the women's role of running, where the men, you know, can just get started at 20 and go for it, and that is starting to change, and I challenge everybody who's watching and everybody in here to really think about that, because we need those voices of those 20 and 30 and 40-year-old women in our governments.
What does it take
and there's
to
not
run?
as many.
Sorry to interrupt. What does it take for women to run? I mean, at Take the Lead, we talk a lot about embracing power and redefining power for yourself. There's all these conversations online and offline about renegotiating your relationship to power, understanding it differently, working with language to understand it differently. What does it take for women to kind of step into that and go for it?
Step into it, go for it. I mean, it's not quite that easy, nor is it that easy for men, by the way. I mean, running for office is something that you've got to think about. You got to think where you are, what kind of position you can run for, but think about it, because there's so much public service available. It's not, I mean, we talk about Congress all the time, but city council, school boards, communities, all of those places have elected office, and you can either get started at a local level and do something for your community, and you'll start building that network. I mean, because you do need a network to run from. And what you're doing right here today, that's starting the process to run for office. You know, that's exactly right. I used to tell candidates, when you get a business card and you think it's someone that might be able to financially support you even a little bit, just put a $sign on the corner of the business card, just to remember that when you start doing call time to fundraise when you're for a candidate, you know that that's the person you're going to call for money. So it does take a network, but you can build that. Yeah. And there are great organizations like Emily's List, and locally, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt Legacy community here in New York and across the country that can help get you started too. But the other thing is we have to help each other. Yeah. We have to help each other do this. Running for office can feel like a very lonely step, but your family, your friends, and your community are the ones that are going to stand with you, and that's how you get it done. And we need to ensure that women feel that community around them.
I love that, and that's actionable, right? That relationship building is something we can do now and start building the network now. So just to wrap up, we have a couple more minutes here. I would love to hear either something that surprised you in your work in kind of the women's movement, or what is your biggest hope for the women's movement? We have a long way to go. We're stuck at about 20%, right, in government, 18% in business, across all sectors. Isn't it right around there? So what is your biggest hope, or something that surprised you?
Oh man, I can't believe you're asking that with like 2 minutes.
I know.
left.
I know. And it's like it's going down so fast. Slow the clock down.
One of the things is, okay, a hope. I will give a hope. I do think, I see a sort of trajectory of in our culture, what we're consuming as women, that starts, I don't know when it starts, but let's say Helen Gurley Brown and the Cosmo Girl, and you can kind of trace it to Sex and the City and Bridesmaids, and Frozen. I was dragged to see that movie because I'm not a huge fan of Disney movies with my daughter. And I literally yelled out in the, spoiler alert, in the theater, "She saved herself!" I was so excited.
now I can't go watch that.
But I do see something really hopeful there, and I think men want out of this man box where they're really confined. No, it's actually
We have to tweet that, I'm sorry.
Someone do that.
confined to certain roles, and nurturing parents, being nurturing fathers, isn't totally one yet. Actually, I think that might be they're out of the man box. So I see hope there as well.
Any other surprising things or hopes?
Oh, I'm surprised every day the energy that women leaders bring to the table. And I'm inspired every day. But I have many hopes, and we have so many challenges to ensure that all our communities are brought together. But there's one particular one. So my grandma Nancy is 94 years old. She lives in Mason City, Iowa. And my grandma Nancy would like to see a woman president. And I think she should. My grandma Nancy was born in the year when women's suffrage happened in this country. And so I would like her to see that too. And my 4-year-old nephew, Ryland, I'd like him to grow up in this wonderful country of ours knowing many women presidents. Because I think that will change how the world looks at our nation and how the world works.
I think that's a great place to end. So just leave everybody with that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Terry, Stephanie, Olivia. Thank you.
Thank you.